All right, folks. Today we're talking with Ryan Dawson. He's a he's many things actually, but he's a geopolitical analyst, he's a documentary filmmaker, and he's probably truly the most canceled man alive. And if you're a millennial, then you'll know that he's been canceled from all sorts of applications, including not only MySpace, which you got to be at least 30 years old to know what MySpace is, but also AOL. Completely outrageous. And of course, he was canceled for his work exposing the lies, controversies about 9/11, the JFK assassination, and of course, his anti Israel, anti Zionist activism. He's played a tremendous role since October 7th. If you aren't familiar with him, definitely check out his Twitter page, which I'll have up here in a second. So, Ryan, you were one of the few accounts that had called the coming of this war, which hasn't exactly happened yet between the United States and Iran. But of course, the United States has completely supported and backed Israel in their attack on Iran. And so you could argue that they are already at war. What is it that led you to believe that this was inevitable and that the war was coming?
It was an easy call to make. We knew as soon that this was the plan. This was part of their script. As soon as they could get Syria to fall, Iran was next. And essentially that's what happened they couldn't get Syria until they could remove their support from Russia. And so I always say it like this: once they handcuffed Russia to Ukraine, because they're really fighting Ukraine with absolute support from NATO, otherwise that war wouldn't have lasted very long. 100% of their economy and supplies comes from NATO. They would have run out within months without it. But that prevented them from saving Syria from ISIS. And it doesn't matter if you call them al-Nusra or HTS, whatever. It's a bunch of Salafist, Sunni, Wahhabi, head-chopping lunatics that serve the interest of Israel. Israel's goal was to break the land bridge to Hezbollah, to prevent people from being able to resist their regional ambitions, which is for land annexation and ethnic cleansing of their neighbors. And so they've always been encroaching on Palestine, occupied Gaza and the West Bank. You know what they do. They bulldoze down homes and burn farms, set people and their properties on fire, snipers shooting people at will. People are arrested without warrant, without trial. And then in Gaza, in the last 2 years, they've just bombed residential areas, like every house. Khan Yunis and Gaza City are completely destroyed. They go in and loot what remains, push people down in the refugee camps in Rafah, and then they bomb those too. And then currently their new thing is, as everyone's starving to death and they line up for food, they bomb the lines of people getting food. So this has been their plan the whole time. The problem was the resistance mainly coming out of Iran and Iraq. And initially Saddam Hussein sent Scud missiles into Israel. He supported the Palestinians. So he was the first one removed. And over nothing, they lied about WMDs and destroyed Iraq, killed about 1 million people, threw the country into sectarian violence. And this was a bunch of Jewish supremacist neocons that created these lies. It wasn't oil companies. It wasn't the military-industrial complex. It was Israeli firsters. They benefited. There was already an oil for food program in Iraq. Trade of oil, if you look at it prior to 2003 and after, before and after the war, it didn't change for America. More oil ended up going to China. Kurds end up the ones selling the oil. So who profited from it in Iraq changed, but as far as imports to the United States, didn't matter. In fact, it was less than before. It wasn't for military profiteering. If you look specifically at each lie about WMDs, lying about anthrax, lying about mobile weapons labs, lying about chemical weapons under Saddam's palaces that didn't exist, lying about a reconstituted nuclear weapons program, which didn't happen, and yellow cake uranium from Niger. It's all lies. It was coming from an office within an office run by a cabal of Jewish supremacists, some of whom had worked for Israel, who wrote policy papers for a foreign head of state, Netanyahu, while they worked in the U.S. government, which is treason. Doug Feith and Richard Pearl and Paul Wolfowitz and Michael Ledeen and Elliot Abrams and the usual suspects sat up there and fabricated evidence that they gave to George Bush to create a pretext to go to war in Iraq. And Colin Powell went to the UN with his little mock vial of anthrax, saying they're in violation of a UN resolution. How many UN resolutions is Israel guilty of breaking? Doesn't matter. They said that UN Resolution 1441 stipulated they couldn't have WMDs after the first Gulf War, which was also based on lies, babies on incubators rhetoric. And he held up a little thing of anthrax. And this is key because they had claimed that Mohammed Atta, the ringleader who was on Flight 11 at the North Tower on September 11th, had received anthrax from senior Iraqi officials in a meeting in Prague. And we know so because the Israelis witnessed it. Turns out the Israelis lied. There was no meeting in Prague. Anthrax was not sent by Al-Qaeda, and Iraq didn't have it either. Pretty tough to witness a transfer of anthrax at a meeting that didn't happen between two parties that didn't have anthrax. It didn't matter because they got their war, and it was too late by the time they had genetically traced the anthrax back to our own labs, which out of Fort Detrick, Maryland, which had been stolen in the past by another cabal, Zionist, Philip Zach, Miriam Ripley, and so on, that Iraq had already been decimated. And that was just one of the lies. But it's important to go through the specifics and the individuals that created this, those architects for war, because it's the same ones you'll see again in Syria, the same people you'll see again right now in Iran.
So you
and the
don't
same
view
AIPAC
this.
shills like Ted Cruz, he supported all this stuff. You know, he's a prototype of what's wrong with American politicians. He thinks he's fulfilling biblical prophecy. He thinks he's blessed if he serves Israel. He's serving his own wallet, is what he's serving.
Yeah.
But
Well,
you know, they
he's
do
just being a good little goy.
Yeah, well,
So you don't view
him and Lindsey Graham.
this in any way, shape, or form as being in the interest of the United States, not even 1%?
There's no. They know they are not building a nuclear bomb, and they knew that. They got that assessment as recently as March. Obama had a sort of like Charlie Brown with the football. Here, you can kick it, but he's going to a fake deal with the JCPOA to pacify Iran as they took care of Syria. So Iran's kind of hoping they can get a deal for uranium enrichment. You know, if they have nuclear power, then they can offset the oil and gas they consume on electricity and sell that instead, which gives them surplus, which gets them out of perpetual debt cycles and no more dependency on IMF, da da da. But they have these crippling sanctions. Like, why are all these sanctions on Iran? Iran's not a threat to the United States. Well, all these sanctions are on Iran because that's what Israel wants. And they don't have have a program to enrich uranium to 90% to build a bomb. They're religiously against it, and they know that if they were to pursue such a thing, they would get destroyed, nuke themselves, were they to do it. But they did have enrichment, which they allowed inspectors in. They worked with Europeans. But then Trump comes in and just tears up the deal. Iran didn't leave the deal. Donald Trump tore up the deal. So they said, if you're not going to lift sanctions and unfreeze our assets and money, then we're going to enrich uranium because, you know, you left. They go to 60%, which I think was a mistake. But they were doing this so they could bargain that away and get back on the deal. They really, really naively thought, if we comply, the United States will lift these crippling sanctions as long as we are doing what they ask. And so fast forward to currently, Donald Trump sends in Steve Witkoff, who is not an honest actor. He's an absolute Zionist, Jewish supremacist out in New York, who was a middleman in a transfer of money between Shimon Cohen, or Time Wertheimer, the richest man in Israel. He's on the board of governors of the Jewish Agency, and Bernard Kerik, the police commissioner in New York, who claimed he found a 9/11 hijacker's passport somehow. A guy gave it to him amongst the debris and chaos in 9/11. He ends up going to jail for a decade on several different felonies and worked with Gambino crime syndicate. So did Witkoff. Like, they're all little criminals. Witkoff worked with Antonia Golubchik and Tony Salerno and a bunch of thugs. You know, they sent him to Ukraine. He didn't even know the basic geography. Kind of like Ted Cruz. Like, oh, what's it matter? Well, how much attention could you be paying to the Ukraine-Russia conflict if you don't know the name of the oblast,
Right.
because it's that Donbass region of Luhansk and Donetsk that broke away originally. I mean, going back from 2014 to hot civil war in Ukraine, and you'd have to know. You could not know that if you really cared about the causes of that war and what happened. But they act like it's the Death Star. They think we're more similar to Star Wars than World War II or something. He didn't know. He's got that cruise ignorance and he's proud of it. He's like, oh, I don't know these details. Who cares? He wasn't there as an honest broker. They weren't really trying to end the war between Ukraine and Russia, because he goes over there and they did, like, all you'd have to do is, okay, show me something. Stop supporting Ukraine with munitions and money and drones and stuff. They did none of that. So Russia's like, well, we don't believe you. We're not going to believe, like, if we withdraw, like, that happened once. You're not going to fool us again. So he all he wanted to do is divert more resources to the Israeli theater, because they don't really need Ukraine so much anymore because Syria has been toppled. And that was the whole point. Like, Russia is tied up. They can't support Syria or Iran, as they allowed Al-Qaeda, Giuliani, to destroy Syria and murder Christians and Alawites and other Muslims. And that's what they've done. They have a fucking Al-Qaeda runs Syria now, and they're allowing Israel to use their airspace. And all these, like, Salafist Sunnis are like, oh, Assad, he doesn't do anything when Israel, periodically bombs the Damascus airport or something. Like, what would you like him to do? Go to war with Israel too? He can barely handle what he has on his plate. Yeah, but then Al-Qaeda comes in and they destroyed all of Syria's air defenses, I mean, within days, because they just let them have it. They took Mount Hermon, they annexed southern Syria, they cut off all access between Iran and Hezbollah will now wither on the vine. And so next on their script was Iran. And it's not just some coincidence that right after they finally get rid of Syria, that now Iran's 5 minutes away from nuclear bomb. Yeah, bullshit. Tulsi Gabbard went in and saw that they don't have the capacity. They're not spending centrifuges to make this uranium-235. They know the American public's too ignorant to understand the process of building a nuclear weapon. They don't know the difference between 90% and 20% and 3%. And they did agree with Witkoff, who is not an honest broker. They said, okay, we'll go down to 3.6%, which just keeps keeps the billions of dollars they've already sunk in afloat, at least for energy. And oh no, the Israelis want it to be zero. So Witkoff does agree, and then goes and he talks to his real puppeteers, which is the Israelis, and they said yes. Well, then raise the bar, say zero,
Right.
and tell them to get rid of ballistic missiles and
Right.
this and this and this. And
I mean,
so,
Witkoff was taking meetings with the Mossad hours
yeah,
before meeting with them, in Rome
yeah,
and in Oman, just like, why would you even meet with the Mossad at all? Like, well, why is that a
and
normal thing?
well, yeah, obviously, and I'll tell you, well, all they were really doing for the 3.6%, which they were never really agreeing to, was just something they said to get inspectors in. And they were using the IAEA to spy on Iran, to figure out the locations of their, not only the nuclear facilities, but the scientists. And then they went in on a preemptive strike and murdered the scientists. They murdered nuclear scientists and generals, and they knew exactly what they're dealing with. It reminds me of, my brother brought up an analogy, like what they did to American Indians, sending in a wagon of supplies so they could count how many people there were, how many male fighting age, what
Yeah,
weapons
like
they
a
had,
Trojan
and then
horse.
it was like a Trojan horse, exactly. And it just, they go in, they use nuclear inspectors to spy on Iran and understand the capacity, the depth, how far under the ground things are, find out where people live and murder them in their houses. And they had done this before. They used Stuxnet before. They'd murdered scientists before. They'd used proxies before, like MEK and Jandala and even some Azeris, to murder people within Iran. They had agents inside. They had drones take out air defense systems, and they knew where everything was because they had allowed a team of spies from the IAEA, which can never be trusted again. How can you ever allow the International Atomic Energy Agency in when all they were doing is acting as spies for Israel?
Yeah.
That's disgusting. So, like, there was no deal. There was just, well, an excuse to get people inside so they could bomb them. They knew they didn't have a weapon. The real thing is they don't like that Iran supports the what they'll call proxies. They're terrorists, whatever. The Houthi and Hezbollah, and you got to understand, like, those factions are reactions to Israeli regression in the first place. Hamas too. Hamas and Hezbollah did not exist until the 1980s, and Israel's
Right.
been occupying Palestine since 1948 and had a series of wars, all of which they started, not only in 48 with annexation and Nakba, where they just went around slaughtering villages that weren't even involved. The Suez Crisis in 56, the Six-Day War in 67, the Yom Kippur War in 73 were all started by the Israelis to grab land. And then also 2006, they tried to go into Lebanon. That one failed. They lost that one. And then all the incursions into Palestine with cast lead, pillar of defense, protective edge, the 2021 war, Palestine crisis, and then all in between. They've been in the Great March for Peace in 2018 and 19. The snipers would just go out and shoot people near the wall that were unarmed and protesting, and they would just go and shoot kids in the head like trophies, videotape it, put it on Telegram or Twitter. It didn't matter. So they've never known peace. October 7th didn't just come out of the blue. I point out 233 Palestinians had been murdered that year prior to October 7th. Thousands have been arrested without cause. That's out of the West Bank and Gaza, and there is no Hamas in the West Bank. Imagine if 233 Jews had been murdered. Just shot, just whatever. And they're
Well, the
not
first
being
thing that
any
would take
reporting on
place
it.
is that number would be inflated by 1,000%.
Yeah, it'd be 2 million or something. But I mean, if even, 3 had been kidnapped or murdered, it'd be international news. It'd be, oh, hey, like,
Yeah, no,
look what
that's an
these
excellent
terrorists
point.
have done.
Yeah, in 2014, I don't know if you remember, 3 settlers, not even 3
Yeah,
Israelis
3
in
colonizers.
yeah, but 3 settlers in the West Bank had been kidnapped or disappeared, and they bombed Gaza for like 60 days.
And they grabbed a 16-year-old out of the West Bank and settlers ganged up and grabbed a teenager and poured gasoline down his throat and lit him on fire from the
Fire,
inside
yeah,
out like a candle.
yeah,
And he wasn't involved. He was just a kid. He wasn't involved in the kidnapping or anything.
yeah.
2006, they said that their soldiers were kidnapped. They were in Lebanon and got captured. So they're in Lebanon, where they get captured in Lebanon by
Yeah.
Hezbollah. And they said that they
Kidnapped out
acted
of the
like
tank.
they'd gone into their house and kidnapped them in Israel and brought them back to Lebanon or something.
Right.
And so they had a war over that, and they never did get those guys back because they lost the war in 2006. But if you remember, I'll set the stage for the audience that might not know, or maybe. Syria used to have troops in Lebanon. Everybody knew it. And so they staged this, they assassinated Rafik Hariri and blamed it on the Syrians. And Justin Raimondo did a good write-up about it. Syria had nothing to do with it. But Assad said, okay, we'll pull our troops out of Lebanon. And they thought, okay, now with Syria out of the way, we got a one-on-one with Hezbollah and we'll smash them. So they went in and they did not smash them. They got their ass handed to them. And they realized that we have to break Syria completely to isolate Hezbollah because supplies could still get in. And Israel's not used to fighting people who can shoot back. They're used to, hitting kids who throw rocks or just unarmed, babies in an incubator that they can freeze to death. Those are the kind of opponents they like. They blew up all 36 hospitals in Gaza. They blew up aid workers, shoot the journalists, shoot the medics, blowing up food trucks. They murder people waiting for food. They destroyed their electrical power, water, all their infrastructure. They bomb people in their beds, like in their homes. They tell them to go to location B, and then they bomb location B. They've done every war crime there is, and they whine about a shockwave hitting a hospital. When Israel acts, like everything they accuse Hamas of doing, Israel's actually guilty of doing. It's a great theme of
Yeah.
screaming in pain as they beat you. It's always guilty of their own accusations. They really do mix their military headquarters and residential zones together where they put things right under other buildings. They do use human shields. And so your initial question, like, why did you predict this war in Iran? Like, it was obvious. It's obvious the United States follows whatever Israel demands. They completely the media is absolutely Zionist. It's disgusting the way they reported all these conflicts. I skipped over Libya, but rinse and repeat there. And so I said, okay, well, before the ink was dry in their truce with Hezbollah, who they also attacked in 2024, I mean, that day, like within hours, here comes Al Qaeda right on time. Here comes ISIS invading Syria. And without Russian support, it was over. Assad, the economy had been crippled by sanctions. Assad had won that war as far as he'd taken all of the southwest Syria was Syrian again. Rojava had been annexed by Kurds, and Idlib was run by Salafists, but it always had been. That's who lived there before the war anyway. They were nuts up there. But he couldn't afford to pay his military. He couldn't pay his officers. And they've been crippled by U.S. sanctions. They've been softened up. So when another round came, they could not last another protracted war. Whereas Al-Qaeda has all the support of the Gulf Arabs, Israel, the United States. They get all the money, all the weapons they need. There's no sanctions on ISIS. There's only on Syria. And Israel's always bombing Syria. And the point of that, when they would periodically go, and most of the time it wasn't that effective, like they wouldn't even be able to hit any targets, or they might kill one or two people. But they knew that it's going to cost about $1 million to defend this attack that they don't have. And so every time they do an air raid, it's like it costs Israel what? They lost 2 planes in all of their air raids. Well, no, 3. One was just blown up in the air. One was crash landed on a road, and those 2 pilots died. And another one was damaged but landed. So I guess they repaired it. So that's why I said 2. But all the other ones they started firing from further back. They could fire from the Mediterranean Sea even, knowing there'd be enough warning time for most of their Delilahs and Popeyes and glide bombs to get intercepted, but also knowing that they're exhausting the Syrian air defense system and money and missiles that they can't afford to replace because their economy's broken. So they just do this all year, like once a month, and not one time. I mean, these are warplanes firing missiles into another sovereign nation, which is an act of war. Not one U.S. paper would even mention that it had occurred. Why? You really got to ask that. I mean, we're so used to, well, obviously they're not going to. Well, why not? I mean, imagine if Syria had taken warplanes and fired them into Israel and it not being on the news. There's no way that would happen. They did it over and over again. They softened that up, and they handed that country over to Al-Qaeda. Similar thing in Libya. That was a functional North African country that's now run by apes. And so, essentially, just the kind of people that would shit in their own hand and call it a free lunch. Fucking room temperature IQ, religious fanatics. That the CIA, this is a longer story, but the CIA and co have been fostering cannon fodder with financed hyper-radicalized madrasas and imams intentionally to create this rent-a-terrorist. Like here, we've got a ready supply of morons to go throw against the wall to use in their imperial escapades. And Saudi Arabia has been right up there with the United States in that too, with sponsoring everything from Al-Shabaab to Boko Haram, they're just idiots, and they cause problems all over Africa. But they've got deep pockets. You're seeing it now in the war in Sudan. The UAE is sponsoring the rapid forces with Hamidi, prolonging a civil war that isn't going anywhere, but it ensures the flow of Sudanese gold to the UAE. 90% of the gold being smuggled is going to the United Arab Emirates. I mean, Hamidi and his family members all have accounts in the UAE. So that's what that's about. These Gulf Arabs sponsor terrorism all over the world. So everything that they actually do is what Iran is accused of doing. They'll say it's for Israeli security. It's not for the Israeli security. Israelis the one preemptively attacking all their neighbors and actually assassinating the negotiators. The people who were trying to negotiate for peace, Israel murdered them. And they bombed the Iranian consulate in Syria. Remember this. This is what started Promise 1 and Promise 2 back in April and October. And so it all culminates like you knew they were going for Iran. When their president went down in a helicopter mysteriously on a trip to Azerbaijan, and the 2 escorting helicopters didn't. That was sus and worth looking at again. They are murdering negotiators. They had Trump tear up the deal And everything I just said, they were planning to attack Iran no matter what. Netanyahu's been saying they're 6 months away from a bomb for 20 years. And so suddenly, Trump, he's got hardcore Zionists, Christian Zionists in his cabinet, and he's got that Adelson money and that Ackman money and the carrot and the stick, with the blackmail isn't just Epstein, it's violence. It's do it or we'll blow your head off. And
Right.
he already got shot in the ear. So he's complying. He's good going now. Because if you remember, Trump did end aid to Al-Qaeda back in 2017. And it was the moment America stepped out is when Assad started getting victories in Daraa, Palmyra, Deir ez-Zor, Hama, and even Aleppo. Like, all that had to happen was cut off the flow of arms and money from the United States. And these terrorists lost. They can't fight on their own. But look at the 180 he's done.
Well, very well said. Ryan, thank you so much for taking your time to be with us today. I really look forward to having the next conversation with you. By the way, where can people watch these films for my audience?
Oh, so you go to, like my hat, ancreport.com. It's anti-neocon.
Okay.
And there's a tab on there that says films. Just scroll down and it's big white letters on black. It says films. Click that. And you can watch all but 2 of them are free. So you can see the Trump film, the Biden film. I did a film on neocolonialism in Africa, why Africa's poor. There's the origins of the how terrorists formed a nation on Israel. There's my film on Syria. There's War by Deception, which is on Iraq and 9/11. That's like the free version. Empire Mass, I asked people to buy. It's 5 hours, and it's like everything ever.
Trust nothing. No lies.